Welcome to the Quarter Life Lessons podcast,
a show on the many relatable lessons learned to and through the journey of adulthood. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Charlia. Let's get started.
Relationships are hard, but oh so rewarding. Today I want to talk about something my partner and I discovered in therapy, and it's called the 4 Horsemen. Have you heard of it before?
I have not.
She said skeptically. Okay. I'm by no means a therapist or counselor, but let me tell you, when I learned about this framework by Dr. John and Julie Gottman of the Gottman Institute, it provided so much clarity to my understanding of my own conflict communication and conflict resolution style. Being able to identify the 4 horsemen in your conflict discussions is an essential step in eliminating them and trying to replace them with healthy, productive communication patterns. I'm a visual person, so when I think of the 4 horsemen of conflict, I imagine the Harry Potter scene from Sorcerer's Stone when Harry and Ron jump onto the backs of the chess knights and are riding the horses around in the game, right? So The 4 horsemen are things that are negative in your relationship communication. We're going to talk about all 4 and some antidotes to the behaviors. But literally what I see is when we're talking about one of the horsemen, like pretend that you're on that horse saddled up, ready to drive into battle. And then you have to think to yourself, do I really want to be on this horse? Is this the right horse for me in this conflict? Spoiler alert, the 4 horsemen are not good, right? So you don't really want to be on any of these horses. But as we get into them, imagine how hard you hold on to the back of this horse when you're on it. And like you're entrenched, you are on that horse. And this whole podcast, what I hope people take away is I can let go of the reins of that horseman in this conflict and try something healthier.
Okay. I'm interested.
Interesting. Okay. So anyway, that's just how I process it as a visual person. And I wanted to kind of share that. So the first horseman that you want to be on the lookout for is criticism. So in any interpersonal relationship, whether that's an intimate partner, a friend, anytime you're in conflict with someone you share a relationship with, the first horseman to be on the lookout for is criticism. The expression of disapproval of someone or something based on perceived faults or mistakes. Instead of sharing your feelings with I statements and owning your emotion and what you felt, criticism looks a lot like you never think about how your behavior is affecting other people. I don't believe you are that forgetful. You're just selfish. You never think of others. You never think of me. That's criticism.
Okay, so this is not self-criticism.
Nope.
Like, it's not saying, like, here's where I think maybe I could have done better.
That comes in later. Different horsemen.
Okay, great. But yeah, that does seem like it would start a real issue because I would automatically be upset by a statement like that because it's a finite statement and it's not taking in consideration any other time that any other thing could have happened.
Right. It's an attack.
Yes.
You are selfish. You always do this. And anyone who's been to marriage counseling or just any kind of therapy knows that in therapy you try and use I statements. Mm-hmm. You actually go a lot farther in conflict resolution when you can start a feeling. Our therapist would correct me a number of times from saying, I think you did XYZ. She would correct me and say, you don't think an emotion, you feel it.
Fair.
She would say, Stephanie, use your I statements or what have you. And so then I would start saying sentences a lot more like this. I was scared when you were running late and didn't call me. I thought we had agreed that we would do that for each other. Instead of, you never call, you made me scared, you are selfish, right? That's right. Criticism. Using criticism and it comes out like an attack versus the antidote to criticism as a horseman is I statements. So the important thing to learn is the difference between expressing a complaint or a fear or a feeling and criticizing the person and putting a bunch of blame into it. When you see criticism showing up in your relationships, you've got to take it seriously to start to unlearn that behavior, because if unchecked, it can only get worse and it can be so harmful in all kinds of relationships. When you're angry, your emotions are all about you. It is so hard to stop yourself and use emotional maturity to put out your feelings rather than these criticisms of it. They're almost like the symptoms.
Right.
Instead of what's actually wrong. I was scared.
Yeah. What first comes to mind is, how do I address a boundary that has been crossed without stating, you did XYZ,
Right.
and that made me feel XYZ too?
Right. That's a really good point. I think as we go through some of the rest of these, we're really going to hear about like the negativity that it brings to the relationship and the antidote.
Okay.
And we may get to an example that we want to share that talks about when someone crosses a boundary. It probably focuses more on what you felt because of that action and less attacking of that action taking place. So just kind of a self, what is the word? Like a self-check out there.
Yeah.
Boundaries are so important, and being aware when they've been crossed and communicating when they've been crossed. But I would imagine if communicating that a boundary has been crossed includes criticism, harsh criticism, it's probably not what's really wrong.
Exactly.
It's the emotion behind the boundary being crossed.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah. Okay. And this was just transformative for myself as well. So we'll go to the second horseman is contempt. As I understand it, contempt is truly mean. Treating others with disrespect, mocking them with sarcasm, ridicule, calling names, which I am sorry to say, I can be a bit of a name caller.
We all have our vices.
Yeah. So name calling, mocking body language such as eye rolling, scoffing. The target in contempt is to make the other person feel shamed and worthless. It stems from long steaming, unresolved thoughts of negativity about your partner or the person you're in this relationship with. I believe this can be a sibling, a parent, a partner, a friend, a roommate. In a way, contempt is about moral superiority and kind of an enhanced and mean criticism. So earlier when we talked about check yourself for criticism, because if you don't, it can always get worse.
Absolutely.
I believe contempt, as I understand it, is just a long time of not checking your criticisms, and all of a sudden you have these deep, steaming, unresolved feelings of negativity towards that person. And so the Gottmans, who I talked about before, Dr. John and Julie Gottman, they say contempt is a single biggest indicator of divorce in married couples. And I also think this kind of conflict communication could be so damaging for a child, a parent and a child. And when I was talking with my partner about preparing for this episode, I was stumbling upon this concept of, although I'm not a parent, parents have superiority over a child. You have authority, superiority, more emotional intelligence, more maturity. So contempt, although who sits around thinking that as a parent you have all this negativity towards your child? I'm throwing it out there. And again, I'm not an expert and not a parent. But if you've ever found yourself mocking your child for something or almost teasing the child for something in a conflict, that is a big red flag to figure out what is going on there. How are you using that conflict resolution? How's that horseman showing up? Because not only is there a superiority and an inferiority balance with parent and child, you've got to know that that's there and that authority is used to keep them safe, but then also remove that superiority so that you can model equitable, healthy communication and conflict resolution with your child. So for some reason, criticism and contempt, although you may not, it almost sounds outlandish that a parent would have contempt for a child. But if this is a reoccurring conflict and you're really tired of having that same conflict and contempt for that situation is coming into play, I could see, some mocking or some name calling or something like that come into play there. And I think parents should recognize this balance of superiority in conflict resolution with their children and just be really careful around this horseman.
Right. I mean, you bring up several good points. One being how damaging shame is, period. Whether we know it or not, as soon as we know it, if something you are doing is causing shame or a mockery or simply on the basis of embarrassing someone else, you're 100% right. That needs to be checked immediately, because the amount of work that it takes to undo 1 ounce of shame can literally take years in order to correct. So I hear you there, and parents are the teachers of the children. I'm not a parent either, so just putting that out there. These kids are learning, and they often learn by experience. They often learn by pushing those boundaries and those buttons. I've heard several therapists say that kids know exactly what your buttons are because you put them there. They are your buttons.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So if that is occurring, I mean, absolutely look for other resources to see if you can get to the bottom of that, because like you're saying, it really can only get worse. And because kids don't know any better, they are going through and learning. It is the responsibility of the adult, as are most things in a parent and child relationship, to catch and correct.
Right.
Before it gets out of hand or before it just causes other issues that could be avoided.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily resonate with this, particularly with my own child-parent situation, but I know that there were times when don't be a whiner, don't be a crybaby, and I don't feel scarred or anything because of that. I'm just saying maybe those are simple ways that shame can show up, and I'm wondering if people explore that as a potential contempt or criticism creeping into their relationship. And remember that that is modeling, like you said, for the child, and that children only learn to fight fair and to avoid these horsemen when healthy conflict resolution is modeled with them and for them. Exactly. So you and your partner, you and your friends, but also in their own relationships. And sometimes those conflicts are something like not doing chores or making a bad choice at school. I mean, you can think of all the conflict that a child would have in their life. Resolving those firsthand with a parent teaches them, but also hearing healthy resolution and other conflict around them. Like I said, mom and dad, parent and sibling. Just wanted to point out that contempt sounds easy to visualize in a peer-to-peer relationship, like especially married people, if one is always holding in their emotions or not feeling heard and just this layering of negativity. But it showed up for me in preparing for today in how difficult it might be to identify contempt in the parent-child relationship. Now that you know about contempt and how it can sneak into your conflict techniques, watch out for it. And if you identify it, take a breath or take a break and start over. Also, side note, research shows that people in contemptuous relationships have weaker immune systems. The Gottman suggests that the antidote to contempt is reminding yourself about the best qualities of the other person you're in conflict with. Take a break in the argument and reflect on your gratitude for that person. This can rebuild a culture of appreciation in your relationship, which is so vital to counterbalancing or minimizing the effects of an argument that has contempt. Okay, horseman number 3, defensiveness. Defensiveness is typically a response to criticism, so those two hand in hand. Every human on the planet has been defensive at one time or another. This horseman is nearly omnipresent in relationships that are on the rocks. Whenever a person feels unjustly accused, they scramble for excuses and play the innocent victim, sometimes hoping to gain control in the argument or to get the partner to back off. Unfortunately, this strategy is almost never successful in reaching conflict resolution. Excuses often come off like one person's concerns are not taken seriously, and no responsibility can be taken to resolve the situation. I think this is where we're talking about boundaries.
Right.
So a boundary's been crossed, like we talked about before. You share the feeling you have about that boundary without criticism. Now we're ready for the third horseman to come to play. When a boundary is crossed and someone shares it, whether with criticism or without, defensiveness has the chance to show up.
Right.
This horseman reminds me a lot of how important it is to be heard or to hear other people. When you're upset and you share an I statement, there's nothing more frustrating than receiving defensiveness. It's so invalidating.
Yeah, I think that previously or in any other encounter that I've had, when someone responds with being defensive, it's almost like any work that I put into nicely framing the situation or to make sure, like, I don't want this to blow up, so I'm going to make sure I come in with my I statements. I'm going to make sure that I'm not attacking. And then you don't even acknowledge what is being said. I feel like the effort feels null and void. The effort turns into, why am I even trying if the other person is not going to try? Or if the other person can't even meet me halfway to acknowledge what is seen as a problem and what is causing a problem for the other person. Honestly, I don't have much patience for defensiveness, especially because I feel like it takes a lot for me to come to a conversation with an I statement or to tell you how I feel or to break that barrier of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm probably on my way phasing out of the relationship if defensiveness has come up.
Right. And it's interesting too, I think I said it earlier, but these horsemen can challenge another horseman to show up. So you mentioned I'm on my way out. I want you to hold on to that thought for the fourth horseman.
Okay.
But defensiveness is so hard because there's this tactic that we learned called perspective taking. And it sounds simple, like everyone should know how to do it. But I think it takes true vulnerability to do this. And that is where I, with enough distance from the situation, can fully put on your perspective and wear it and sit in it and think about what that felt like. Enough that we can have a conversation about coming to kind of agreement or consensus about how the other person got to that feeling. Mm-hmm. Perspective taking is so validating, but doesn't always have to be because of wrongdoing on the other person's part. Defensiveness, I think, stems from, and again, not a therapist, but in my experience, defensiveness stems from the other person maybe feeling shame or guilt or inadequacy, or it coming to them in the form of an attack. If you're a little bit more insecure, if you're feeling bad already, then maybe you get to defensiveness even when the other person's using I statements. Okay?
Fair.
But definitely, if you're not in check and someone's using criticism, defensiveness shows right up for the challenge, right? Mm-hmm. So if you can take criticism and say, no, like you're on the sidelines, then usually in a mature, kind of healthy relationship, defensiveness will also stay on the sidelines. That's ideal, right?
Right.
That's how you're going to get to healthy resolution. But remember, when criticism is there and that horseman's present, a lot of the time, defensiveness is going to run in for the battle too. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like an agreement you have to have in this relationship, is that criticism and defensiveness, we're not going to bring either of those to this conflict. And if one starts to bring the other, we should have a healthy enough relationship to call it out nicely and respectfully, maybe take a break and then come back to it.
Right.
The other thing is, I think when people think about defensiveness, it's like they're not always looking for an apology.
Right.
And, even when I was reading about this on the Gottman's website, it talked about, you can recognize the feelings and then apologize for any wrongdoing. That's the antidote to defensiveness, according to their research. I personally believe the apology isn't always necessary. just knowing that my partner can take my perspective and understand how I got there mentally.
Right.
Understand why I'm so upset about the missing phone call or the missing something or this thing that happened that I've perceived this way. Justify and validate that feeling. Unless you particularly had a wrongdoing in that, I don't need the apology. But defensiveness is like, I don't want the blame, don't put this on me. It's so minimalizing and invalidating. Folks that use defensiveness, which I'm sure I do sometimes too, if you could stop, and again, a lot of this is about having emotional control of your own reactions, but if you could stop and say, my partner's not looking for an apology here, or they may or may not be looking for an apology here. What they're looking for is to be heard.
Right.
And my defensiveness and my kind of discrediting that is not going to get to resolve.
Can I throw a question to
Yeah.
you? Do you feel like in the moments where you don't necessarily need an apology, is that in hopes that the action will not be done again?
I think if you're in a conflict where you're hoping the person learned something and it won't be replicated, there's probably been some wrongdoing or a boundary crossed. And I would think that you maybe would want recognition of that wrongdoing and probably an apology. But things that I'm talking about are more like where two things are true at the same time.
Fair.
And that does happen to me a lot. And for a long time, I was thinking that a lot of things and emotions were binary. Like, I'm right, you're wrong. If I'm wrong, you have to be right. And I really don't think that all conflict is binary. I really honestly believe two feelings can be true at the same time. And if you have a problem apologizing, if you feel like in some way apologizing or admitting blame is like it makes you feel insecure or you're struggling around that, maybe think about that a little bit more, or like take some personal work to that. Because for me, if I know that somebody is hurt because of my actions, whether intentional or not, or whether I felt they were wrong before I did them, like the wrongdoing piece, if somebody I love is hurt, I am sorry that they're hurt.
Yeah, and I will apologize.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess apology signals right and wrong.
Right.
But in an argument where two things are true at the same time, apology doesn't feel like wrong. It feels like empathy.
Yeah, it feels like seeing you where you are.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So I just kind of want to throw that out there, that maybe right and wrong is too binary for some conflicts.
Yeah.
But that in a conflict, again, where there's authenticity and trueness and rightness, I guess you should say, on both sides of a conflict, an apology can be this olive branch or a shared recognition of both perspectives.
Yeah, it's kind of like the bookend or the period. Like,
yeah.
Where we made it to this point, let's either continue to break down whatever else is going on, or we can start moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, and I when reading about defensiveness, I just wanted to kind of share that to that own reflection of mine, that take away the binary component.
Yeah.
And think about it holistically and check in with yourself and say, whether or not I feel like I did something wrong, can I learn from this experience?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, obviously these are complex emotions, but the Gottman's advice for unlearning defensiveness: don't be afraid to ask for time if you need it. Try your best to understand your partner's perspectives and motivations, and take responsibility if there's wrongdoing. So that is from the Gottmans. All right, last horseman, stonewalling. Do you have any idea what stonewalling is?
I think I do, and I think I probably do it.
So I'll be honest with you. When we went into therapy, I did not know what stonewalling was. I mean, it sounds aggressive, right? Just the word itself.
Right.
Sounds aggressive. But normally Stonewalling is a response to contempt. So remember before, excessive criticizing, that's super negative. Stonewalling occurs when the listener withdraws from the interaction, shuts down, and simply stops responding to their partner. Rather than confronting the issues with their partner, people who stonewall can make evasive maneuvers such as turning out, turning away, acting busy or engaged in obsessive or distracting behaviors. This can feel like avoiding the conflict, which conveys disapproval, distance, and separation. So when a friend or partner says things in an argument like, I'm done, I'm out, that can be a signal of stonewalling. Or just stop talking to you, silent treatment, that's stonewalling. The Gottman say it can take time for the negativity caused by the first three horsemen to become overwhelming enough that stonewalling becomes understandable. If you're in an unhealthy relationship that always has criticism, contempt, and defensiveness, it's understandable that stonewalling would be used to try and gain control in the situation or get away from the conflict.
Right.
So that's kind of what they're saying there. But when it does, it frequently becomes a bad habit and is just reoccurring. These guys always want to call each other into battle, and you just have to be so aware of them. So knowing that we've talked a little bit about those types of stonewalling, Charlie, do you think you are a stonewaller, and kind of how do you feel about it?
I know that I have done that in the past, yes. In the past, I think that where the stonewalling has come from is what you were saying, giving several opportunities for whatever the problem is to be fixed and letting time pass. But then I don't think that I'm as skilled in bringing up whatever the issue is early enough. So I'm already to a point of where I'm ready to leave, and you may not even know that something's wrong, if that makes sense. But in my mind, I'm like, this is obvious because it's happening to me. It's not the other person that's experiencing it. So to me, I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely ready to be done with you. Here's the reasons why. You have 10 minutes to fix it. Otherwise, we can just be done because I'm already kind of over it. Which is not exactly fair.
Right.
It's not fair at all, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
But I feel like it comes from, and again, I haven't had that many long-term relationships, not romantically at least. But it comes from when I did bring up the behavior, that amount of time afterwards, when there was still no correction, when there was still no change, and I was still extremely unhappy, like unheard, unseen, I think that end piece is what's getting shorter. The amount of time that I give you to reconcile, the amount of time that I give you to correct the behavior is getting shorter. And I don't know why that is. Like, why is my patience on the latter end shorter, even with different people? Like, I feel like I'm just tolerating less, and it may not have anything to do with that person. It's just that I'm assuming that I know where this is going to go based off of your actions, which I'm not always wrong. But what is the amount of time that you give a person to fix things that you're bringing up with an I statement, let's say?
Right. Yeah, I don't know that I have the answer to say that, but maybe I guess what you're saying is it's not enough to perspective take if it had to do with wrongdoing.
Right.
You also have to quit the wrongdoing. And so I think that's a big piece, and maybe is outside the four horsemen piece and more has to do with boundaries and kind of what you accept in a relationship. But I think that's what I hear you saying is my patience is running thin because maybe they hear what I'm saying and we don't have criticism and defensiveness happening, but we don't have correction.
Right.
And then I would say that's a red flag, and that's not healthy either in a relationship. But yeah, a good point about patience and maturity. I think those are maybe along the outsides of this battle royale.
Yeah, for
Emotional maturity and patience probably are like the referees and the cheerleaders, if you will, in when the four horsemen are around, because with them in control, the horsemen can kind of stay to their corners, and with I don't know, aggressors and cheerleaders of the horsemen, maybe they start to come in and take over. But yeah, unfortunately, stonewalling isn't easy to stop. It is a result of someone feeling psychologically overloaded, flooded with feelings, which means they aren't even in a healthy psychological state to discuss whatever you're talking about rationally. If you don't take a break, you'll find yourself either stonewalling and bottling up your emotions, or you'll end up exploding at your partner, and neither of you will get anywhere good.
So, okay, I'm hearing two different things then. I'm hearing evading the situation and taking a break. Can we establish like the difference between the two?
Yes. So this is exactly how I was feeling when talking about horseman number 4 as well. So interesting that stonewalling, which as I understand it is kind of like abandoning a conflict and minimalizing it, can be counteracted with the antidote that the Gottmans are talking about, with asking to take a break, both behaviors creating space, but one feels like a joint agreement with a promise to come back to the topic when you're ready to resolve, while stonewalling feels one-sided, that could easily hurt the other person or leave them feeling shame and abandoned in the conflict by themselves.
It's just really hard to still be empathetic and like care that this person that's still sitting here in the conflict that I'm now over is hurt. Like, why do I care about that? It has nothing to do with me now.
Are you talking about the very end of a relationship? Or are you talking about a conflict where you want to resolve?
I'm talking about a conflict where there has already been an attempt to resolve it. And again, like I said, I'm short on the patience in that area. So I don't know if I've ever done it correctly. But
no, this is good.
Yeah, so like I'm saying, like I'm already on my way out. And I think again, that is a defense mechanism, like me not caring about anything that has to do with this.
Right.
How do I put the care back?
So I think that goes into this antidote to stonewalling, and it talks about going to self-soothe during the break. So in stonewalling, you're like, I'm out, I'm done, you're not worth it, I'm so over this, and it's very kind of attacking in itself, antagonistic, and I think it can make the other person feel abandoned in the conflict, right? And then you're out, you slam the door, you're out of there, right? Or the relationship is over. But the antidote to that would be, hey, this got really complex. I'm not ready to have this resolution right now. I would like to come back to this tomorrow or in a few 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then in that 20 minutes, each party goes to do some psychological soothing, thinking about what's really important to them. Is this reminding them of any triggers that they may have from prior relationships or prior experiences, and kind of resetting yourself emotionally. And then again, like I said, the reason I think it's so different is because taking a break and agreeing to come back doesn't feel like you're being abandoned. Right. As long as you take that space, they're both about space. One is about kind of attacking and telling someone they're not worthy of any more of your time. The other one is about making a commitment to come back when you're more, what's the right word? When you're at an even temperament, and you've thought about some of the triggers and you've calmed down. It's maybe less emotional and you're ready to resolve. In my opinion, I am not the Gottmans.
No, that's fine. That's fine, and I understand. I don't want to abandon, quote unquote, I don't want to abandon somebody who doesn't deserve to be abandoned, but I will abandon people that need to be left in the dust.
Yes, you should not put up with things that cross boundaries you've set. Right. You should not put up with things that are manipulative of you and are not healthy for you. Right. So I guess I should say that the four horsemen are really about trying to recognize things that can exacerbate conflict and make it worse,
That makes sense.
and try to find resolve. Again, exterior to that is the person you're in a relationship with healthy enough to also practice these things with?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you in a situation that you shouldn't be in, and you should be ending that, doing some self-exploration and looking for a relationship where you are able to practice healthy resolution and healthy conflict?
Darn.
Just
when I thought I did enough work, Steph.
It's really funny because stonewalling, again, I didn't know the term. Going into therapy, I didn't know the term stonewalling. I don't believe I practice it as a person,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not because, as you can tell, I like to talk. I'm an external processor. But when somebody stonewalls me,
Mm-hmm.
it's hurtful. It feels controlling. It feels invalidating. It feels like I'm not important to have this discussion with. So if you are a stonewaller out there and you don't mean to, you want space, but you don't mean to hurt the person, then practice this antidote of, hey, let's agree to come back to this. Let's take some space. You get your space, but you agree with the person that you're in the conflict with, that you're going to come back to it, and what you're talking about is important. It's just you're really amped right now, and nothing good is going to come from continuing to battle, if you will. And not physically
Right.
battle, but
Right.
like nothing good is going to come from this deeper argument.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go self-soothe. Let's go think, especially about our triggers and what we've brought to it thus far, and then come back to resolve. That is so amazing. And even if I'm not ready to take that space as someone who externally processes and wants to resolve in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
that's me. At least I feel seen, that what I'm arguing for and about is important to the other person. And I can give the grace or give the space, and even recognize, I bet I could benefit from calming down as well.
Yeah.
So anyway, Thrivers, those are the four horsemen: criticism, contentment, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Remember that these communication errors show up in all kinds of intimate relationships, and just because you know about them does not mean your relationship struggles are solved. I'm aware of them. They still show up in my conflict. It's a practice to self-identify these traits and to begin to unlearn them and try to eliminate these kinds of unproductive, sometimes damaging communication habits in your relationships. To learn more about this framework and other great relationship tools, please explore the Gottman Institute at www.gottman.com.
As always, the conversation does not end here. We want to know your thoughts on these topics. Join us on Instagram at quarterlifeLessonsPod to share your perspective and continue the conversations to thrive. Thank you for tuning in to the Quarter Life Lessons podcast. Find our new episodes bi-weekly on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, or our Buzzsprout website.